It's a pie eating contest where it's going to open up doors for more speaking opportunities and things like that.
Welcome to The Legal Edge, where we cut through the noise and get to what actually drives law firm growth. I'm your host, Rob Rosasco. My guest today is a trial lawyer first and a podcaster second, and that order matters. Bob Byrne is the president and managing shareholder at Martin Wren in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he spent more than 20 years handling catastrophic personal injury and wrongful death cases. He's the only attorney in the entire state of Virginia to carry a board certification in truck accident law, and is only one of about 100 throughout the entire U.S. So when he talks about building a brand, he's not a marketer theorizing. He's a working litigator who's done it. A few years ago, Bob and his wife, Lauren, who is also a trial attorney at Martin Wren and his co-counsel, started a podcast called Trials of a Lawyer, a show about the actual craft of trying cases, made by two people who try cases together and raise a house full of kids while they do it. For an audience of law firm owners who keep hearing they need to be creating content, Bob is about as honest a case study as you'll find. A serious attorney with a demanding practice who's picked up the mic and is kept at it. That's what I want to get into today. Not whether podcasting is a good idea, but what it actually takes, what it actually returns, and where it can get difficult. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate being here. Thanks so much for asking me to come on board.
Good. Glad you're here. First, Bob, I want to start with the practice of law because the law and your understanding of the law is the reason why your listeners make their way to your podcast. You've built a name and reputation in one of the most demanding corners of trial work, catastrophic truck accident litigation. And there's a credential attached to that practice area that very few attorneys across the U.S. hold. So before we get anywhere near marketing, I want our audience to understand who they're listening to first. So please give me a quick version of how you got to where you are today and where your practice stands as it relates to the work that you do.
Sure. So, I've been practicing for over 20 years. And what's interesting is that I certainly didn't start out handling truck crash cases. And I would say, even though I'm handling catastrophic and wrongful death cases, that's not where I cut my teeth, and that's not where I started. I originally had an opportunity to either work for a firm in Virginia that did nationwide product liability, kind of cream of the crop style cases, or I could move to Charlottesville and basically do a basic civil litigation practice with a firm and handle whatever walked in the door and build a practice from scratch. And if you've ever been to Charlottesville, you would make the same decision I did. And I jumped at the opportunity and just started working and building a practice from doing kind of whatever, I think it was, sometimes they call it a door practice, which is you practice anything that walks in the door. And over time, I just got narrower and narrower. And it basically brought me to a point where I started really focusing on truck crash cases. And that's what I've been doing for about the last 10 years pretty heavily.
Okay. And I have been to Charlottesville, and I completely understand. So what actually changed then? What led you to make that transition 10 years ago to focus exclusively on not only just injury work, but specifically truck accident litigation?
I think that there's something about the same kind of thing where someone says, what is that? They see Mount Everest and they look at it and they say, I want to climb that. And it's the sort of thing where you want to, I think I wanted to push myself and see what I was capable of doing. I had a couple of truck crash cases that I picked up from a friend, and then he recommended me to someone else who was in a crash involving a truck. And then they recommended me to someone else, and it just blossomed from there. But I think that there was something to be said about, I'm one of those people who likes to dig really deeply, maybe in a couple of, into brain injury litigation and truck crash litigation and spinal cord injuries. And those all kind of tend to be involved in truck accident litigation. So I don't have the skill set necessarily to handle a docket of 300 cases. And instead I'll handle probably 10 to 20 at any given time.
Okay. So as I'd mentioned earlier, you're the only attorney in the state of Virginia that is board certified in truck accident law. So tell us a little bit about that certification and how does an attorney go about earning that certification? What does it require?
Sure. So we're used to hearing about board certification really in the medical space, and you'll hear about board certified cardiologists or obstetricians or things like that. And basically, anytime there's a board certification, you're going to have a professional organization that's going to set standards. And here it's the Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys. And what they've done is they've established basically a system where you can take a mini bar exam. It was a 1-day bar exam or the equivalent of a bar exam, a written test and multiple choice. And then you also have to satisfy a number of experience requirements to show that you are experienced handling virtually every aspect of a trucking case. Perhaps that you have spoken and taught other attorneys, you've written about truck crash cases, you've handled them from soup to nuts. And then you have to have references from both attorneys that you've worked with and attorneys that you've worked against in trucking cases. And some judges also need to provide references. And so you get all of those things, and you have to get all of that within a certain period of time. And then you can submit an application. And then basically, if you can satisfy all those things, have a passing score on the exam, then you can become board certified. So it's a multi-year process, and it's something that does take a lot of effort in thinking about and really focus on.
And, I guess anybody, me included, could potentially be a prospective client for you. And hopefully I never am.
Never. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're a family member, if you're involved in a truck accident, and we know how horrific they can be, and or a family member of someone who was injured in a trucking accident, you want someone like you on the case. I didn't realize the process was so comprehensive, but it's good to hear.
Yeah, it's pretty a lot of times, one of the reasons why the board certification was set up is because it is a specialized area of law. You have an entire body of substantive law that applies only to the trucking industry. You have different kind of accident reconstruction standards that are unique to trucking. You have different insurance requirements. You have a number of different things that could cause attorneys who handle car accident claims to get in over their head pretty quickly and really cause someone who might have a $10 million case to resolve that case for $750,000. And that was happening. And it was problematic enough that a bunch of the top trucking attorneys in the country said, we need to do something to separate, to show the public, the consumers, that there's a way of finding an attorney who won't allow that to happen, where there is a case that settled for peanuts that should be a massive resolution.
And holding insurance companies accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue to my next question. Let's talk about the fundamental differences between trucking accidents and other type of potential injury cases like car accidents.
Sure. So, just like I was mentioning, you have an entirely different body of law that would apply. So the trucking industry is something that affects interstate commerce. And so anyone who is a lawyer is going to remember constitutional law. And if something impacts interstate commerce, then Congress has the ability to regulate it. And so Congress has regulated interstate trucking with the federal motor carrier safety regulations. And those impose all sorts of obligations on truckers and on trucking companies, freight brokers, freight forwarders, different parties that are in the transportation cycle. And so that can change the rules of the road that can apply in any given scenario where there's a truck involved. And that's one of the kind of the biggest jumping off points. But then another big issue is knowing the transportation cycle to identify all the proper parties. It isn't necessarily the case that just because there's a truck with a driver that causes a terrible crash, that the liability question ends with them. oftentimes that's where it starts, because there's usually some large corporations that have put that driver and put that truck on the road to begin with. And that's where that analysis really focuses. And that's where, after that, the insurance issues, it's issues with physics and the handling of trucks and how they'll handle differently in weather with trailers and the weight and the space and the size difference, how that all comes into play. And it can all be very interrelated.
And the severity of injuries too.
The severity of injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, without question. I mean, you look at the fully loaded tractor trailer can be 80,000 pounds. And when there is a collision that happens, so many of our clients end up having some sort of traumatic brain injury, a lot of spinal cord injuries, and a lot of unique presentations that happen with neurological injuries when mixed with orthopedic injuries. And then you start having this terrible cocktail that's called polytrauma. And then, of course, death cases. So they can be very, not usually a standard whiplash where someone might heal in 6 weeks to 90 days or something like that.
Yeah. Life-altering injuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Both you and the firm, Martin Wren, have a strong presence across the state of Virginia, a well-known attorney, well-known firm, and you've established yourself as a subject matter expert when it comes to trucking litigation. Then a couple of years ago, you and Lauren decided to start the Trials of a Lawyer podcast. I want to better understand the thinking behind that, because for a lot of attorneys, the line between the firm's brand and the individual attorney's brand can be confusing. When you think about building your brand versus building the firm's brand, how do you sort of balance the two? And I'm assuming they can work in conjunction with one another, but talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think that there are, there's certainly some times where there are firms that have a very strong brand and a presence. They are very well known. In our firm, I'm the managing attorney of the firm. And so we have certainly tried to establish a presence in the market and a brand for what it is that we do. Though one thing that I've observed is that there's a level of goodwill that attorneys individually may have. And so when you're talking about trial attorneys, oftentimes, as opposed to, say, finding an attorney to handle a personal injury case, I think if somebody's looking for a routine personal injury case, they're going to be looking for a firm with a brand. They're not necessarily seeking a specific attorney. When I think you start to get into a situation where it's a larger case and it has specific issues, significant injuries, and it's the case that might be more suited for a trial attorney as opposed to more of a common personal injury lawyer, I think that's where there's that professional kind of goodwill that is recognized. And it might be the case that when you're talking about trial attorneys, that's something that is recognized by other attorneys, whereas the firm brand might be something that's recognized by the general public. And so a lot of times we're talking to other attorneys, they know us, and they will hear us speak at conferences. They will hear us in webinars and stuff like that. So we were being asked to speak a lot on certain topics, and when we were developing some traction professionally as far as that was concerned, we thought, you know what, we might as well have an opportunity. Rather than having to fly to California to give a speech, maybe we can ease up a little bit on our personal lives and professional lives and see if we can have our voice be a little bit more accessible and easier to convey for us. So that was some of the thinking that we had.
Gotcha. Okay. So of all the ways that an attorney can gain recognition in terms of creating content, of course, we have drafting, writing content, writing blogs, writing articles, writing guides. We have different types of video, short form video, long form video, various other types of advertisements. Where do you think podcasting ranks in terms of the quality of improving your brand?
So I think it depends. And I think it depends because One thing that is really interesting about this industry is there are so many different types of personal injury lawyers. It depends on what type of lawyer you are and what type of content you have and who your intended audience is. And so if you are trying to talk about some very technical issues of trial practice or technical issues of trucking or whatever technical issue it may be, you're probably going to be speaking to maybe not necessarily specialists, but people who are looking for a specialist. So you're going to have a smaller audience. If you're talking about, say, something that could be more common, like what are 5 things you should do after you're involved in a car crash, that's probably going to be a wider potential audience. It's going to be a lot harder, I think, to differentiate yourself. I don't know that people are necessarily going to tune into a podcast listening to the 5 things you need to do if you've been involved in a crash. And I think that a lot of those folks that have that business model probably are on podcasts that are more business oriented as opposed to practice oriented. But I think that when you start getting into more technical areas, that's where you need to be able to show a level of expertise and ability to handle some of those technical things. I think podcasting, writing, speaking, those things could be extremely important to do to really be out there and to be recognized as a thought leader and to be recognized as someone who is capable of dealing with some of those complex, difficult topics and things.
Gotcha. Okay. So early on, from the beginning, this was a 2-person podcast. You and Lauren did this podcast together. Why did you, either one of you, both of you collectively, why did you decide to do it as a duo as opposed to one of you taking it on solo?
Our unique angle is that we are a duo, we're a team. We started doing it when we had done a number of trials together and we had a lot of success. And it was something where the success was not, it was a team sport. It was something where we collaborated, we worked together. We learned a ton about ourselves, about each other by putting our marriage to that test. And it was something that it was appropriate for us to do because I think it's more than just talking about trial practice or some of the nuances of our particular craft, but it's also has a uniquely human component because it's talking about our marriage and our business relationship as we're in this position where we're working together and we're in an extremely stressful endeavor. And so it's kind of interesting for us as well to talk about and to hear about from each other.
Okay. So you're still recording the podcast, you're still partners at the firm, and you're still married. So I guess you must have passed the test.
So far.
Okay, good. Very good.
Yeah.
And a question that I'll even preface it with, I don't really expect an answer, but just to see how you reply, I'll ask, who's the better podcaster? Who's the better lawyer?
I would say we're very complementary.
Okay, good answer.
Yeah, I think that we're very complementary. There's things that I'm good at that she's usually good at just about everything. There's things I'm bad at that she's good at. And so it's one of those things where it just works well for us because we know each other's weaknesses and we know each other's strengths. There's some areas where we're both strong. And I don't think that there's really many areas where we're both weak, which is nice because I think that helps us as a team.
Exactly. In so many different aspects of your life, obviously, not only with the podcast, but in terms of practicing law and raising children as well. So,
yes, very much.
Very good. So one of the things you shared with me when we spoke a few weeks ago was one of the things that gave you pause when you thought about or started planning the podcast before you even recorded episode 1 was the commitment to following through to continue recording the podcast. I'm curious, what were you actually worried about in that regard? And what is it, if you can describe it, that allowed you to overcome that fear and eventually just push forward?
Well, I think that there will be times we'll go through periods where when there's a trial that's coming up and you have a week-long trial that's set, you're going to be out for the week of the trial. You're going to be out the week before the trial, and you're probably going to be out the week after the trial while you try to catch some things up. And you just need to be very deliberate in terms of setting aside time to focus on podcasting and business and marketing issues. And that's tough to do when all you can see, you've got your head in this hole and all you can see is what's in the hole. And so that was an issue. I was also concerned potentially about having fresh content and ideas and just not being personality driven, but trying to provide content for things that we had learned and trying to help people along with things that we had learned. And I think that those were the two big issues. But then once you can get around some of that by just being very deliberate in planning in advance. And so if you are going to maybe batch some content, then you can record a couple of different episodes at once so that you've got one in the hopper that's ready to go during those really intense periods. That's something that's very helpful to do. And there's always, I think that we will see things that come up that give us ideas for content. And so it seems to be something where there's plenty of stuff. And once you do something for 20 plus years, you've learned a lot along the way that you can share.
Yes, agreed. And you've met a lot of people that have given you plenty of cannon fodder for discussions. So,
Oh, absolutely.
So anyone that sells podcast production services will tell you that they have a statistic that shows that podcasting will create new clients. It literally prints clients. Right now, you don't have anything to sell to our listeners. I'm going to ask for your honest read. Most lawyer podcasts we know just don't succeed as well. Yours has, and it appears to be thriving. Just off the cuff, talk a little bit about the benefits of your podcast. Has it led to signed cases, or are there any other ancillary benefits that producing the podcast has provided you or the firm?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that was interesting to me, what is fascinating about social media and just being on this side of a microphone is that you don't necessarily know who is consuming what you're saying. You don't have if there's no sign-in list, people are not checking in and they're not in a place where you can actually see them while like you and I are interacting right now. And
Right.
what has been fascinating to me is I was out in Las Vegas at a conference. I was at another conference in California, and I had attorneys from out west in several other parts of the country who have come up to me. I've never met them before. I didn't know them. And they would say that they listened to the podcast. They loved the podcast. They really appreciated this one episode. And so it's given me, I think that one of the benefits of podcasting and one of the benefits of social media, if done correctly, and I would consider this a form of social media, is that you're kind of top of mind for certain people. And our audience is other attorneys. We're not necessarily talking to folks on the street, although we do have some folks on the street who listen to it. But most of the people who listen are other attorneys. And yes, we've had all sorts of contacts with them about a lot of times it's a pie eating contest where it's going to open up doors for more speaking opportunities and things like that. But yes, there have been cases that have been generated as a result of it.
Okay, very good. This one might be a difficult one to answer, but I'm curious. Are there attorneys out there by practice area or maybe personality type who you think are better suited to host their own podcast as opposed to maybe finding another form of advertising or social media to participate in?
That it's not necessarily, it might be more personality driven than it would be necessarily, say, practice area driven. I think that you can have probably a practice that's dealing with estate planning And if you can tell stories and make things practical for your audience, then I think that there's a potential audience out there and that people would listen and they would be interested in that. I think that it's all about making something compelling, whether it's through education or entertainment. You can read Black's Law Dictionary to someone, and that would be educational. It wouldn't be entertaining. It wouldn't be
No.
unique, really. It's not something that you're providing a value to anyone because it's something that they can get on their own. But if it's something where you're mixing those elements to make it interesting, potentially entertaining, and educational, I think that that's the trifecta that you need. And it's not married to any potential practice area.
Okay. So if someone listening today wanted to start a podcast, say they've put a stake in the ground and they want to start a podcast today, what would be your advice to what they should do first and maybe something they should ignore at least while they're getting started?
I would say the first thing to do is to just maybe plan out 6 episodes. What are 6 things that you think you can talk about that would be interesting, educational, entertaining, that people would want to hear about? And then if you can come up with 6 topics, turn it into 6 episodes, and I just start recording. There's no barrier to entry, and give it a shot and then see what you can do. And if you want it to be more professional, there's things you can do as far as sound quality and video quality and production quality and all of those things. But I think it really starts basically with a phone. You have everything that you need to get started, and you can put something that is great quality together pretty easily and pretty quickly. It's just, I think that a lot of times in this modern culture, there's this idea of just create, and if you create, it will come. I don't think that is the answer, and I don't think it's that simple. I do think that you have to not just get on and do a stream of consciousness, but you've got to be thinking about the interesting, educational, entertaining, whatever that angle is going to be. It does require some work and some thought and some preparation. But if you're willing to put that in and then you record, I think that good things can happen.
I agree. And I agree with your initial assertion that you just have to get started. If the first couple you record aren't what you're looking for, then change something and keep at it. But until you actually get started, you're just simply never going to know what you can create.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think one thing that's also helpful is that social media is free. So once you decide that you're going to do it, then you've got something that you can video it, and then you can chop up the videos. You can start sending those out onto Twitter, or actually you can put them on Instagram. You can put them in YouTube, make a short out of them. And so it's this kind of, I don't even know if funnel's the right word, but it'd be a cycle where it's this self-feeding organism, and you have this content that promotes it, and then you can get it out there and it will just create.
Yep. I agree. Okay. So developing a podcast presents challenges for most people for a number of reasons, and potentially even more challenges for attorneys, considering the focus of their work, the amount of work required. You've got equipment, recording format, scheduling guests, topics, distribution, just to name a few of those challenges. And one additional challenge, of course, attorneys might face is navigating bar rules. Obviously, there are certain things you can discuss and certain things you cannot. So let's talk a little bit about those challenges and how you've addressed them. So how did you and Lauren, or how do you and Lauren decide what topics you're going to cover on a podcast?
So usually we will talk about things that have happened. Either we're going to talk about a trial or a case, and we're going to make it completely anonymous. So we're not divulging any information, because you want to assume, even though you make something anonymous, that people are going to be able to reverse engineer to figure out what case it was. And so you don't want to indirectly be disclosing attorney-client confidences. And so that's something that we may have a case and we may decide, talk about something that happened in the case that we had strategized about, we had set up, we had figured out how to do something and how it worked out for us. We may talk about techniques that we use that were helpful. We've been doing a lot of things basically that we're talking about that we've done that have worked for us and and just things that we've learned along the way. And I think that's something that is helpful because it allows us to pay it back for others who have taught us along the way. And we're helping to invest in others just as others have invested in us.
Good. Okay. Now let's get a little more specific. And just a minute or two ago, we talked about the importance of just getting started and the fact that you could do this with just an iPhone or a phone. But if considering where your podcast is matured to or evolved to, obviously you're intimately familiar with the pieces and parts that make up your recording studio. So talk about the single most important piece of equipment that you would recommend a new podcaster consider once they get their podcasting career started.
I'd say the single most important thing to consider would be a good microphone or good audio quality. That is something I had no idea that there was such a thing as an audio engineer, but it's a major field, and sound quality is incredibly important, and it's really hard to do. I think that it's easy to do a voice memo where you set your phone out and then you just start talking, and you'll get decent sound quality with that. I think that when you try to level up, you can get better sound quality. It gets much, much more complicated though, because when you have a microphone, then you have to have, I don't even know the name of the thing that you plug into that there's all sorts of equipment that I've learned how to use, not necessarily that I necessarily know the names of them. And I think that focusing on sound quality is something that is very important. There are good options that are out there that are very reasonably priced. So it doesn't mean there's top of the line equipment that you could get, and you could spend probably tens of thousands of dollars trying to get the perfect sound quality system. But unless you are a trained professional, you're talking about the difference between the 96th percentile and the 99th percentile, which most people are never going to know the difference between.
No.
We can tell the difference between 50th percentile and 80th percentile, but at some point it's diminishing returns. It's super important if you're operating on a certain level, but that's not where we're at. And I think that's the sort of thing where if you're looking for that level of sophistication as a podcaster, then you're going to very quickly make the perfect the enemy of the good, and you're just going to get stuck and not do anything.
Agreed. And that's a phrase that I love. The perfect is absolutely the enemy of the good. So finally, let's talk a little bit about the flip side. What advice would you give an attorney that's thinking about starting a podcast in terms of what they should avoid? What mistakes should they keep an eye out for? Like we do with our children, if you could prevent them from making the mistake before they actually make it, what would you advise an attorney that's just getting started?
I would say that you have to commit. It's one thing to say you've got to start. It's another thing to say you have to commit. There is a certain, this is not something where you can say, I'm going to do podcasts, and then you do one episode and then you think, okay, I've done it all. I'm a podcaster. We're all set. We're making this happen. It's something that you do, I think, need to do a lot of planning. And I think the planning part would be figuring out what you want, that list of topics, and what is your niche? What is your wheelhouse? What is your focus? And it could be finding perhaps 15 guests. But I think that there's a critical mass that you need to have as a podcaster. And if you don't have a certain number of episodes, then most likely you're going to fail. And so you want to get on the other side of that critical mass so that this is something that has a life of its own. And that's something that's very important to really focus on and develop. And so that's what I would say is once you make that decision, start mapping it out and then just get to work.
Okay. So now I have a list of questions that I refer to as our rapid fire session. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Give me 20 to 30-second answers quick, the first thing off the top of your head.
Okay. This is where
All right,
people
let's
get
go.
canceled when they, that's
All right.
more difficult.
Yeah, I don't think we have any questions in here that are potentially cancelable, provide cancelable answers. So
Gotcha.
in one sentence, why should every attorney consider starting a podcast?
Because branding is the one thing that is going to set you apart in this new economy. And you have to have visibility into brand.
Okay, good. I like that. What is more valuable today, a billboard or a microphone?
I would say a microphone. When deployed well, when deployed thought, a microphone.
Okay, fair enough. And I agree with you. What is the value of a podcast for attorneys, law firms, and can a podcast actually generate new clients?
Oh, yeah. We are in an attention economy, and having a platform is incredibly important. A podcast gives an amazing platform and absolutely can generate clients without question.
Biggest mistake an attorney makes when starting a podcast?
I would say starting without having a plan to get through. So I would, like I said, come up with at least 6 topics, but even better, come up with, say, 12 or 15, and then just execute. Just get to work and start recording.
One piece of gear or software that was actually worth the money?
For me, microphones were worth it. I think that those would be the best investment. I think that pretty much everything else I already had, and I was able to just make it work with what I had.
Podcast format, solo or co-hosts?
So for us, it's co-hosts, and that's our gig. We're a team, and so it's the two of us. We haven't had any guests. It's just been us. We probably grow faster if we had guests because we'd be having their audience, but I feel like we still have a lot of things that we need to discuss, just the two of us.
Gotcha. And finally, what do you say to an attorney who's thinking about starting a podcast, but they're convinced no one's going to listen?
Maybe no one will listen, but you'll never know. You'll never know. And I think that it's the sort of thing where if no one listens, no one will know. No one would know that it's a failure. But what if it works? What if you find yourself in a position where you have a voice that people want to listen to, and you have wisdom that you can convey and information to share? That's going to make people's lives better. And it's worth trying, I would say.
So for an attorney, a managing partner, a firm owner that's listening right now who wants to take one thing away from this conversation, what would you suggest? What would you offer?
I would say that most law firms and attorneys are, in terms of marketing, are probably following the pack, and they're trying to do more of what the pack is doing, maybe do it a little bit louder. And I think that I've always been one where I try to zig when others zag. And I think that my efforts are best spent differentiating myself. And I think that's something that is a very worthwhile thing to do. You want to differentiate yourself. And it's hard to do that with just paid advertising, because at some point it all just is noise. Right. And I think that having a podcast gives you an opportunity to have a voice, and a unique voice that is different than anyone else.
So Bob, for people, listeners that want to follow your work or actually want to check out your podcast, Trials of a Lawyer, where can they go to find you?
Sure. So the easiest way to find me is on our website, martinwrenlaw.com, and Wren is W-R-E-N. I'm also pretty active on Instagram under Robert Byrne Lawyer. I have a YouTube page, same thing, Robert Byrne Lawyer. And then, of course, Trials of a Lawyer podcast is where you can find us.
Okay, very good. Bob, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. And This is the type of conversation that this show exists for. Not a sales pitch, not this is what you need to buy for your podcast, but just an honest read from an accomplished, successful working trial lawyer on the trials and tribulations of putting together a podcast and committing to that podcast. And the subject matter, to be a subject matter first point that we made early on in our conversation, I think is something that everyone needs to take away from this podcast episode. You have established yourself as a leader in your field, and people should heed what you say. So it brings instant credibility to your podcast. So bringing that to the table as a podcaster can be extremely valuable as well. So if you got something out of this episode, do me a favor, subscribe to The Legal Edge wherever you get your podcasts, leave a review, or just simply send this episode to another attorney who continues to say they need to start creating content. I'm Rob Rosasco. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.